So during the American Civil War, huge advancements were made in the weapons, from artillery to the very rifles that the soldiers carried. These advances would lay the groundwork to what we know as modern day warfare. Well, that also included Navy warfare, from ironclads, where the cannonballs would literally just bounce off of, and this guy here. This is the Hunley, which was a Confederate submarine, and it was recovered in, I believe, 2000, and it is right back here, and we're gonna go ahead and check that out today. I am beyond excited, and I can't wait to share it with you. Here is just an example of what a submarine of that time would have looked like. Again, you can imagine the cramped quarters inside. And up top here, looks like your sight here. Ugh, man, I would not want to be in this. And here's one of the many examples of some of the innovations during the American Civil War. These are sea mines, and you also had landmines. And here's an example. This is the USS Commodore Barney that struck a landmine. I'm sorry, a sea mine. And you can see here in 1863, Theodore D. Stoney of Charleston, South Carolina, built the first David-class steam torpedo boat to aid in the Confederate Navy in attempting to break the Union blockade. And here's what it looked like. That is, I can't believe that they would actually create these in the 1800s. This blows my mind. So the H.L. Hunley was originally built in July 1863 in Mobile, Alabama, where it was put on display for Confederate officials. And then it would be shipped here to Charleston. And here's a little illustration of it arriving. And this quote is quite disturbing. "It's more dangerous to those who use it than the enemy." And Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard said that after the Hunley sank twice in Charleston Harbor. So the Hunley wasn't the only Confederate submarine. They had the Pioneer, and I believe the Pioneer II. And the Pioneer was built in New Orleans in early 1862, and it performed moderately well, even though it didn't have windows. And this is horrifying. Sometimes it would get stuck at the bottom of Lake Pontchartrain, with the crew cranking the propeller, unaware they were stuck. After only a short month's test, the Pioneer was destroyed by the Confederates to avoid capture by the Union Army. That's interesting. And here is the second test. They quickly began to work on an improved version of the Pioneer, and apparently it made an unsuccessful attempt to attack a Union blockade in Mobile Bay, and it sunk while in tow in February of 1863. And apparently this submarine has never been found, at least as of today. The second test was called the American Diver. Just giving you a little background of the creator of the Hunley. It was built by Horace L. Hunley, and he was a successful businessman and public servant, serving as deputy collector of customs in New Orleans. And I believe, in fact, he was on one of the missions where it sank, and he would die. The Hunley would finally arrive at Charleston on August 12, 1863, and its first mission, it would sink at the dock. A few months later, October 15th, the Hunley decided to do a demonstration in the Charleston Harbor, and it attempted to dive beneath the CSS Indian Chief and surface on the other side. But as you can see, once it dove, it never resurfaced, so they had to recover it. Now, the first two missions, obviously, as you just saw, were failures, and unfortunately for the crew, they both all perished. During her test missions in Charleston, the Hunley suffered 2 fatal sinkings that would claim the lives of over a dozen men, including Horace Hunley himself. And here's the first crew. Apparently a few survived. I didn't know that. And here's the second. And just to give you an insight as to what this may have looked like, this is the accommodations inside the Hunley. Could you imagine? Unbelievable. So this is a small snippet of what the Hunley would have looked like. And It's actually 10% bigger than what it would have been in real life. So now I'm inside what would be the hull of the Hunley, and you can see it's pretty cramped. Again, this is 10% bigger than what it would have been in real life. And you can kind of see the hand crank here. I'm going to give the camera to my wife. And so the crew would sit side by side, and they would move this and in turn spin the rudder, and that's how it would move. Definitely not for me. So here's some of the ins and outs of the Hunley, and if you're wondering how they were able to get it to submerge and come back up, well, it had ballast tanks. And to submerge, the ballast tanks were filled with seawater through a valve known as a seacock. Each tank had its own pump to expel the water. This is also extremely fascinating and pretty impressive for the technology at the time. 2 metal tubes attached to the side of an airbox. The snorkel tubes were designed to bring fresh air when the submarine was running close to the surface. Even without the use of the airbox, the Hunley could remain underwater for almost 2 hours. Remember, this is 1863. That's crazy. Now, when you think of a submarine, you think of it shooting torpedoes from inside the vessel. Well, the Hunley didn't have that. It had what was called a spar. It was a long metal spear with the incendiary device attached at the end, and when they would approach a ship, they would literally take that spar and ram it into the side of the ship, and that would hopefully sink it. The third mission of the Hunley was pretty successful, and they would succeed in sinking the USS Housatonic. And here's an account. About 8:45, several sailors on the deck of the Housatonic reported seeing something in the water a couple hundred feet away, and the officer thought it might be a porpoise coming up from below. As the object approached the ship, the crew realized it was no porpoise. The alarm sounded and the sailors fired their guns, the bullets pinging off the metal hull of the Hunley. Below the surface, the submarine rammed her long metal spar into the Housatonic, igniting an approximately 135-pound torpedo in the sloop's side. So this ship would sink, and this would be the first time that a submarine would sink a warship. And again, here's another look at that spar that they would ram into the side of the Housatonic. So the explosion in the Housatonic blew a hole in the ship's hull 10 feet wide, and it would sink in less than 5 minutes, and the sloop lost 5 of its 160 crewmen. Now the Hunley would sink shortly after the sinking of the USS Housatonic, and it kind of remained a mystery for almost 130 years. But the working theory now is that the Hunley possibly received damage from the sinking of the ship, which in turn sank the Hunley. And again, another first of the American Civil War. The Hunley became the world's first successful combat submarine when it sank the USS Housatonic on February 17, 1864. Once the torpedo had detonated on the Housatonic, the submarine signaled ashore that she had completed her mission and she was on the way home. Confederates on shore lit a fire to help guide the Hunley. Instead, it disappeared into the sea. Again, here's some of the theories that they believe why the Hunley sunk. A lucky shot from a USS Monitor, collision at sea, ran into some trouble with the tides here, and this is one of the more popular theories. The torpedo that was used to sink the USS Housatonic caused damage to the Hunley and it sank. So definitely a few working theories if you have one of your own, or if you have a choice here, A, B, C, or D. Feel free to drop it below in the comments. I'm intrigued to read them. This is something else that's pretty interesting. You see this piece and this piece. Well, those were the keel blocks, and apparently those were these pieces here. And they were removed because they each weighed roughly 500 pounds, and the Hunley had to be lifted into that tank up there, which is where we're about to go. And we're headed up the stairs to the Hunley.
Maritime stories. As you look at the Hunley, try to imagine those 8 men fitting into that tight, cramped hall. Sat in the cramped hull of the Hunley, dimly illuminated by
This
only a
is
single
absolutely
candle,
amazing.
in what was surely deafening silence.
You can even see parts of the hand crank. Wow. And then there was a hatch there, and another hatch there. And the video did just state that one of the hatches was locked still when they found this.
Land. With these losses, the head of Confederate forces in Charleston, General Beauregard,
It's really hard to tell which side is the front
He is quoted as
back.
saying,
I want to say,
"I can have nothing more
here's your
to
rudder
do with
here.
that submarine boat. 'Tis more dangerous to those who use it than
I just can't believe
General Beauregard to
that
give him
grown men were inside this thing,
to use
and they had the hand crank
the Union blockade.
just to move
General
it.
Beauregard,
This is really cool to see. Here's some of the images from the conservation efforts here. And I want you to notice something. You see the average adult size here and just how tiny the Hunley is. I believe there was 8 crew members at the time of its third sinking. And here's some of the artifacts that they found here. This is just incredible. Wow. So here's some of the items from Captain Dixon. You have this brooch here, and a ring, and something that's pretty fascinating. I don't know if it's up here or not. In 1862, Dixon's life was spared at the Battle of Shiloh when a gold coin he was carrying stopped a bullet that was meant for him, fired from a Union musket. And they recovered that bullet. And let's see if I can see. And there it is. Wow, you can kind of see it's kind of bent. And here's your brooch and the ring. Now they were also able to recover several other artifacts from the Hunley that were possessions of Captain Dixon. Pocket knife, suspenders, his binoculars, and here they are. Wow.
Any questions I can answer for either one of you?
It's absolutely incredible to me that they can recover this stuff from the ocean and restore it. Just amazing. And right here is Captain Dixon's pocket knife. And if you're wondering what that fluid was that the Hunley was soaking in, it is sodium hydroxide. The chemical bath will have an added benefit of loosening some of the concretion on the hull. And that's all the sediment and things like that that build up on the hull there. Wow, that's pretty interesting. And if you're wondering what concretion is, well, that's this stuff. And it's pretty much sand, silt, other shell life, and rust that builds up on the surface. Here's a few of the other artifacts that they discovered on the Hunley that are just too delicate to have on display here. You can kind of see the candle and the crew bench. Wow. And this is, I think this is most fascinating. This is a bandana that was worn around James Wicks. And you can see the restoration efforts. That is incredible. And here's another one. Apparently this was an oil can. This just amazes me how they can literally bring history back to life. And here they're just showing you where they found some of the belongings inside the Hunley. Apparently they found a Union ID tag towards the front along with a skull and some other artifacts in the center of the ship. A leather wallet. Wow. And a lantern. Really cool. Really helps paint the picture into not only how cramped these quarters were, but just some of the conditions here on the Hunley. I thought this was a pretty unique story. A Union sailor on a Confederate submarine. Well, Mr. James A. Wicks here was born in North Carolina, and he enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1850. Apparently his ship, the USS Congress, sank in 1862, and he changed sides and enlisted in the Confederate Navy, and he was stationed aboard the CSS Indian Chief before volunteering for the Hunley mission. And here's a few of the other items that they found. Apparently some of the buttons, the United States Navy button there, and a pipe. And talk about getting personal. Here was his shoes. Wow. And then here's this another incredible little nugget. Apparently, Mr. Wicks here was in his 40s, and he was about 5'10". Now this is pretty interesting. This is the size of the crew on the last mission. 6'1". Could you imagine being 6'1" and in those cramped quarters? So here is the crew of the final mission of the H.L. Hunley. And they were the pioneers of submarine warfare. And they all have the CSA Medal of Honor, which is something that I didn't know existed. But yeah, here's your crew. And kind of neat how much detail they put into what the crew members may have looked like. And again, here's James A. Wicks, and there's this bandana, and that's one of the items that they found and is preserved here. So here's a little bonus for us. The CSS Alabama was a Confederate warship that was actually built in England, and it spent 2 years roaming the globe, never once docking in an American port. She was a raiding vessel designed to prevent goods and supplies from reaching the Union, and the Alabama intercepted more than 60 ships and took more than $600 million in prizes. Until her final battle, no lives were lost on either side as she pursued her mission. Now, the CSS Alabama would dock in France in need of repairs in 1864 when it was intercepted by the USS Kearsarge, a sloop of war who's been pursuing the Alabama. Well, a naval battle ensued, and the CSS Alabama would be sunk off the French coast. And 120 years later, it was discovered, and 2 of its artillery pieces were preserved. And here we are. Unbelievable. It's hard to imagine that a piece this big, firing a shell, the destruction that it would cause. This thing is absolutely massive. It's got to be at least 8 feet long, at least, maybe even 10. And that's what. And here's a depiction of the CSS Alabama. So we're here at the Magnolia Cemetery, which is a short drive from the Friends of the Hunley Museum, about 10 minutes, and we are here visiting the site of the graves of the sailors here from all 3 missions from the Hunley. Step up here. So here rests the first crew of the Confederate submarine H.L. Hunley, died August 29th, 1863, near Fort Johnson on James Island, reinterred here on March 25th, 2000. And the crew members from the first mission. And here's the second mission. The crew, here lies the crew of the H.L. Hunley, died on October 15th, 1863, making a practice dive in the harbor here. And again, that first name, he was one of the original designers of the Hunley. And here is the third. Here rests the third and final crew of the Confederate submarine H.L. Hunley, died February 17th, 1864, after sinking the USS Housatonic, the first successful act of a submarine warfare, buried here April 17th, 2004. And their names. And here is their graves. You know, regardless of your opinions about the war and the causes of it, you can't deny the fact that after the first 2 failed missions, that these are some brave individuals. They all volunteered, and as you see, their final resting place here. And I think that courage, regardless of what side it may be on, is definitely noteworthy to remember. So that by far was one of the coolest things I've had the opportunity to experience. I remember as a kid watching the show called Raise the Hunley, where they were actively working to raise the Hunley from the sea, and just be able to come here as an adult 22 years later and see the Hunley in person. It was really cool. again, the Hunley Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, worth a visit. And something to remember is conservation is never over. The efforts ongoing here are years and years in the process, and there's still many years to go. So with that comes a need for funds. If you're feeling generous and you want to donate to something to preserve some history, the American Battlefield Trust, of course, is a great resource to donate to. But the Hunley Museum, I enclosed the website down below, hunley.org. I'll also enclose a link to donate to keep the conservation efforts here going. And let's go to the next one.